I was working as a day shift patrol officer for the Division of Police.
I was a firefighter in Asheville, Ohio.
I was working my part-time job. I worked for Lowe's.
I was working for the Ohio Department of Transportation.
I was the principal of a rural high school in far western Ohio.
I just turned 12 and I was actually in the 7th grade going to school at West Jefferson Middle School.
I worked in Jersey City for Fleet Securities at the time.
I left the house around 9 o'clock, I think. I remember listening to a CD, put that CD in and was oblivious to all of it until I walked in the newsroom.
I recall we were in a classroom setting learning how to become better police leaders, and had our facilitator walk in the room and share that something had occurred in New York City. And we looked at it at that moment like this is some kind of exercise for us. This is a part of this training program.
I specifically remember getting a tone over the radio from our dispatch center requesting that all apparatus return to quarters once your runs are complete. And I thought, wow, that's an odd request.
My wife texted me on a pager, on a digital pager, and texted me that a plane had hit the World Trade Center tower.
To me, I assumed it was a smaller airplane, but we had gone into the break room to see the news, to see what it was, and once I saw the images and the pictures, I knew it was something of a bigger scale. Being from New York City and having actually been in that building and standing around as a little kid, kind of made my heart drop a little bit.
My father, who is a Lutheran minister in Connecticut, called and he said, "Is your TV on?" And I said, "Dad, it's morning, it's a high school." "No, my TV's not on." He said, "Turn on your TV." And while talking to my father, the second plane went into tower number 2. And at that moment, talking to Dad, kind of knew this is very different. And I'm not sure why, but I went over to the old-fashioned PA system at the time and made an all call to the high school and said, "Teachers, I want you to turn your televisions on."
We had just sat down in ancient history class and suddenly our principal actually came busting into the door and told us, "Hey, there's been an attack in New York City. I need you guys to turn your TVs on." And I can remember his face perfectly because he was scared. You could see he was visibly shaken from everything, and you could see in his eyes that there was real fear because he didn't know what was going on.
Every student in that high school watched the towers fall. And I went home that night not knowing if that was the right decision. But in retrospect, as those students graduated during my time there as principal, and even since, some of them have gotten back in touch with me and said, "I remember because it was on in my classrooms."
We turned on the TV that happened to be in our conference room and watched live as that first tower was burning, and that's when the second plane hit.
All of a sudden, we started to get a lot of calls. People were calling, and one of those calls was my sister calling me to say, "Tommy's building was hit. There's a plane." She was kind of like, and I couldn't make sense of what are you talking about? This was my brother, Tom Strada. He was 41 years old on 9/11. Was in the North Twin Tower. Went to work that morning and never returned home. He had just returned to work and had welcomed his third baby into the world only 4 days before that happened.
Prior to the plane hitting, I remember it was a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. I was actually at the South Tower. I can tell you like it was yesterday. I was around shopping at all the vendors and buying peach pies and peach cakes to bring to the office, and I remember buying a bouquet of sunflowers. And then I went down into the South Tower because they had a concourse underneath, bought my coffee at Au Bon Pain. And as I was walking around with these packages, I kept getting a nudge. It was almost like a little voice in me saying, "Get to work." And this was at 8:30.
After the planes hit, which was below his floor, they went out into the stairwell, and they were going to try to make it, to the roof of the building. He did have an opportunity to call his wife, Terry, and say, something horrible has happened. We're going to try to get to the roof. Maybe we can be air vac'd. They just didn't know.
I specifically remember the Today Show and just seeing the videos over and over and over, and it put that sense of sickness in your stomach.
As the incident kind of started to develop, we had the strong sense that there may be some folks injured. And at that point, they started speculating that several firefighters had died and several first responders were going to lose their lives. And, a lot of us had to hunker down and really decide that we needed to get to our families as soon as possible. My daughters in particular were 8, 7, and 4, and all they knew that I went to work to be a firefighter. They didn't know jurisdictions and everything like that. And to be very selfish about it, I didn't want them to hear on the news as it played in all the classrooms that several firefighters had lost their lives. And I just needed to get to them as soon as possible, and thankfully I had that ability.
The couple things that do stick out about that day, amongst other things, was all of a sudden there was no air traffic. Hilliard is in the pattern for Port Columbus, and there are fairly regular airplanes flying over. You can hear them on a regular basis. That day, it got eerily quiet in the skies, and I remember seeing Air Force One and the 2 fighters coming over top.
We had 2 employees that were in Philadelphia that were stuck there. There were no planes or any cars they could rent. So the next morning, I had volunteered to go get them, and there were no cars on the road anywhere. It was just eerie. I actually drove past probably near where that 4th plane had gone down outside of Shankville, Pennsylvania.
I wondered, what am I going to write about attacks in New York City for the Hilliard newspaper? But by the afternoon, early afternoon, we had found out through the course of the day that there were teachers in Hilliard schools, there were people in the community who had close relatives that were in New York. Some were even in the towers.
I remember the feeling at the time, and I don't know what I could equate it to ever in my life, this uncertainty of what's next to come, knowing that we had been attacked, and not knowing, is there more, what's going to happen next, and just that feeling of wanting to make sure that my family's protected, my community's protected, and what do I need to do to step up to make that happen.
I don't think I ever knew the term first responders till then, but I remember the outpouring of support for the firefighters and the police officers, the amazing things they did on that day. I'll never forget that.
Being a firefighter and being from New York City, there was a certain urgency for me to help and do something. I belong to a FEMA team. We're one of 26 teams that travels to all natural disasters around the country. I had packed up, I traveled all night. So I found the command post. I asked the New York City police officer, and he directed me in the right direction. And I asked him, I'm a firefighter, I'm from Ohio, I'd like to help. We got on the bus, went a few blocks, and it was a secure area with unmarked cars. And they told us that we were going into Ground Zero. They were taking us through the streets, and you could start seeing the damage and the debris and the cars that were just total demolished, paper and dust. And as I started to step up on the side rail of the car, there was a little boy that walked up to me, and I could feel him tugging, and I told the driver, hold on. And he had a little flag, and his mom was standing there, and he had a picture, and he gave me his flag. He said, this is my dad. And he asked us to help look for his dad. So we got back into the vehicle and composed ourselves, because that was something else. But seeing the amount of people with flags and the pictures, it was overwhelming, you know?
I don't know that you ever come to grips with such a devastating, traumatic type of a loss. My father, actually, who was the mayor of the village of Westbury on Long Island for many years, he knew Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and Mayor Giuliani actually escorted him down to Ground Zero after everything was done, and my father was able to, scoop up some of the rubble and whatnot, which is what we use to, to have a burial and a remembrance service for Tommy.
I worked in Wall Street for 28 years. I've been in that building, I can't tell you how many times. Almost every day of my working business week, I was down in those buildings. I lost friends, people that should have been there were not there. People that should not have been there were there. There's certain things that I can remember vividly, but I just remember being so numb. We had everyone looking at us. And New Yorkers are something to be reckoned with, right? We're tough old birds. But we all pulled together.
People cared. People came together. It wasn't Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. It wasn't that. I felt my family was enveloped with love. We have huge support. Just with people and friends and family. So we were never in a situation where we felt alone.
It was one of those moments where everybody kind of came together to realize that the country is bigger than what one person is. We realized that someone had attacked us, someone had tried to hit us in the eye, and we were going to respond to it. And I mean, you started to see a lot more people wearing their American flag gear, having American flags out at their house.
Initially, it pressed pause for the country. It allowed us to reflect on what is most important. And for many, it's family. I think about that time and think about the pride that was in the United States.
One of the things I realized a few years ago when I was standing at First Responders Park sharing the history of 9/11 with a group of 8th grade students at the park, and it just dawned on me that they weren't alive when 9/11 occurred. And for them, we're talking about history, something to me that's vivid in my mind, like it happened yesterday, but to them, it's something that's written on the pages of history.
When you hear first-hand history, when people who lived through an event can take you to a place and show you that twisted steel, when people can explain what happened on that day, it makes history real. There's so much of history that we can read about, but when you can hear about it and you can hear in someone's voice the meaning that event had, that first-hand history can't be replaced.
We have this beautiful park in town, and every chance I get to stop by there is I see somebody out looking at the wall, and I can't even tell you the number of stories I've heard where you just see people standing there looking at a particular name that's very special to them.
I have visited a lot of memorials around New York and New Jersey and on the island, and there are so many, and each one is very special. And I knew there was one here in Hilliard because my daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandchildren live here. They always visit that memorial. Tommy's name is there along with everyone else's, and it's special. I recently moved here, so I'm happy that within a 5-minute drive from where I live, I can go there. Not only on the anniversary coming up, but any day when you can remember the beauty of the person that you've lost and the life that they lived. And he was an extraordinary guy. He was someone everyone loved. He was a storyteller extraordinaire. You just knew how much you loved him because he made you feel so great. To be closer to that and feel a little bit of that, that's a nice thing. So I'm glad that that's close by to me here.
9/11, supporting our first responders, patriotism is, to me, it's very much the fabric of this community. To have the gym that we have, First Responders Park, in this little suburban community in the middle of Ohio, and I think that really said what Hilliard is all about.